Friends, I thought long and hard about not only how to write this commentary, but whether it was even a good idea to broach this subject at all. Mostly because our culture has become so emotionally charged by social media that I really couldn't see the upside of sharing an opinion on a matter of such great importance. Since that means I felt somewhat fearful of censorship, and I am an artist, I figured what the heck and decided to give it a go. Why? Because I feel it's an important question first regarding social justice and tolerance, and secondly because it has reared its ugly head into my world, the world of fantasy fiction. My friends, you might have heard that Amazon Prime has created a new fantasy series for streaming television. The trillion-dollar mega company has spent a reported $1 billion producing the show, making it the most expensive television or movie production in the history of humanity. So because of all that money, the stakes for success are quite high. The series, The Rings of Power, is an adaptation or a fictionalization of the historical tomes of J.R.R. Tolkien's ancient fantasy world prior to The Lord of the Rings. To be clear, the show wasn't written by Tolkien, and because it's the most revered franchise in fantasy the world over, the whole idea of this endeavor has been rife with controversy from the start. The principal concern being people who are not Tolkien altering or misrepresenting the beloved canon of Middle-earth. But after trumpeting its culturally diverse cast as historically relevant in its pre-release promotional campaign and a subsequent lackluster opening week, the show has received a stunningly bad series of reviews by fans, particularly those who revere Tolkien. As a result, this week the show's production team has made some serious allegations about racism being the cause of the show's bad reviews. This culminated in a public statement made to the media, tweeted out by the show's cast. It says that some of the cast have been subject to what they report are relentless racist comments, threats, and intimidation that they won't stand for. Who could disagree with that? They also write that Tolkien's world was never meant to be all white, but one of inclusion and fellowship. They urge people to accept all castings regardless of color. Again, I'm not certain what was said to these folks on the internet, but because they've sent out this message, they seem to be suggesting it was quite bad. But whoever said that Twitter or the internet itself was a friendly, supportive place? Now, before I delve deeper into the whole question of diversity in casting, and whether it's virtuous or necessary, I'd like to tell my audience this. If you are sending hateful messages to people, racially motivated or otherwise, you should stop doing that. No one wants to be the subject of vicious, hateful comments. No one benefits. Nothing good ever comes from hate and racial intolerance, ever. That said, now that I've actually seen the show and heard some of the bad reviews, I've grown dubious of the show's intention here. It seems as if they are suggesting, were it not for an army of angry internet bigots, everyone would love this show. I don't think that's fair either. This also begs the very tough question, going forward, whether if a show's casting is not based on racial or ethnic diversity, does that make the very production itself racist? If so, from whom and from where does this inclusion checklist have to come from? I think these folks are heading down a very slippery slope, and I'm suspicious they are using the horrific stench of bigotry as a means of promotion to earn more profits. I truly hope I'm wrong in suspecting that. But let's take a step back and review our recent history. When in doubt, zoom out, I've heard it said. If we're looking for a clear example of exclusion due to race, there's no better example than Jackie Robinson. On April 15th, 1947, Jackie Robinson became the first non-white player in Major League Baseball. Yes, for those of you listening outside of the United States, prior to that date, sports leagues in America were segregated by race. There was Major League Baseball, and there were what they called the Negro Leagues. Clearly, as I am an American citizen, looking back on this is shameful. But it is a fact of our history. It is my opinion that what makes America truly great is that we have the machinery in place to make things right, not that we were always perfect from the get-go. Let's face it, we weren't. Suffice to say, Jackie's entry into the league wasn't exactly welcomed by all. Robinson was threatened and jeered with racial epithets throughout the season. To be clear, these were not mean tweets, but actual death threats made by people angry enough to carry them out. But then, something happened. The opinion of the angry masses began to change. The reason for this was simple. Jackie could ball. He entered the league as one of its very best players, was awarded the Rookie of the Year, and the Dodgers went on to win the National League pennant. So the Brooklyn fans embraced him, as did his teammates. This was one of the most important events in racial integration and civil rights in America, and it took tremendous courage from Robinson and his supporters. Since then, all American sports have become completely racially integrated. The NBA, in particular, is now dominated by African American players, not because it's the right thing to do, but because the guys you see on the court are the very best players on planet Earth, bar none. There are white players, some integrated from Europe, and players from Asia. It's a better league because they are not excluded from it. But they are not there just to prevent exclusion. They are not there just to promote diversity. I think everyone agrees it is the very best basketball product, and no one is being denied based upon their color or even their gender. That's a fact. There is no rule banning women from male-dominated sports. In 1963, Martin Luther King gave his historic "I Have a Dream" speech at our nation's capital. If you haven't heard it in its entirety, I've left a link in the description. It is truly beautiful, inspiring, and his words ring as true today as ever. One of the most famous lines was this:
"My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today."
I think everyone can agree with that sentiment. This is America. May the best man or woman win, based upon their abilities and the content of their character. Who could argue with that? Yet there is a new movement in certain Hollywood circles that appears to want to turn that argument for racial justice and equality on its head. This movement, referred to disparagingly as woke, appears to argue the exact opposite. The argument being, don't judge me by the content of my character, but by my race, by my gender identity, or my sexual preferences. That's where I think this movement and this show is going horribly wrong. Friends at Amazon, this is 2022. People of all races and backgrounds want to be entertained and taken away from the rigors of this world in fantasy. They don't want to be lectured about politics or a modern socio-economic agenda. If you promote your production as being great because it is diverse, you're suggesting that race or some other ideological quality better define what is truly best than the individual performers. Is that really the message you want to send? After the recent death of Nichelle Nichols, Whoopi Goldberg mentioned how happy she was as a child seeing a black woman on TV that wasn't a maid. However, in 1966, just after season 1 of Star Trek ended, Nichelle had told Paramount and executive producer Gene Roddenberry that she was leaving the show. She just didn't really like the role. Then she had a chance encounter with Martin Luther King. He told her how impactful her place on the crew of the Enterprise was, how positive a role model she was, that yes, if they apply and believe in themselves, black girls like his own daughters can go to space too. It was beautiful, all around. She was awesome as Uhura, and the show wouldn't have been the same without her. There's one scene in particular that I remember as being quite relevant. Abe Lincoln is somehow beamed aboard, and when he meets Uhura, he says, "Oh, what a charming negress." But Uhura is not offended. She says, "Mr. President, in our century, we don't fear words." That is a powerful vision of the future. Nichelle was an excellent casting, and it happened organically, as a choice unbound by the politics of 1965. It was so far above it. Roddenberry didn't choose her because he was trying to send a political message. He truly believed that in the year 2266, humanity would be past the nonsense of things like racial integration even being an issue. It made as much sense for a black woman to be a high-ranking communications officer as it did to have a Japanese and Russian officer right alongside her. No one batted an eye at the idea of a mixed-race alien with pointed ears being the second in command. It just made sense. That's why it worked. As a positive message, it's important for people not to be excluded, true. It's also positive when people can find inspiring role models in fantasy. But there's this new notion percolating that in order for someone to truly enjoy a program or story, the reader or viewer must feel they are represented in it. This strikes me as quite shallow and unnatural. Do you really need to see an image of yourself in a story in order to understand it or appreciate it? I, for one, certainly don't. I like to see aspects of myself in all of the characters, things I like and admire, and even things I don't. One of my favorite movies of all time was Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Folks, there are no white dudes in it. None. My mother is a huge fan of those Korean soap operas. She can't get enough of them. They are all in Korean. There are no old white women, not a one. I've also been a huge fan of Bob Marley's music. Not because he's black or white. Did you know his dad was an Englishman? If not, who cares? I love his music because he was such an amazing songwriter and lyricist. I love his melodies and his messages, not his racial makeup. So again, it begs the question, are we really sending a genuine message of promoting equality with this casting diversity argument? This notion of people of every race required to be represented as being more important than finding the actor perfect for the role. I don't know if you've ever seen Hamilton. If you haven't, I strongly recommend it. After hearing all the glowing reviews, I thought it might be okay. But it was extraordinary. Lin-Manuel Miranda's music, the rapping, the acting, the stagecraft, it was all amazing. The thing is, never once during the show did it occur to me, Washington, Jefferson, Aaron Burr, those guys weren't black. Hamilton wasn't Puerto Rican. You can't think that, because everything about the casting is perfect. So it doesn't matter. Miranda chose his cast based upon the needs of his musical creation. He picked a cast that could best help him make it happen, to fit his own vision of what he was making. The show was a huge success. Therefore, I think the creative team should be tasked with finding the cast that best represents the story they are trying to tell. If historical, the time and place it's set in makes a big difference, and the reality of the time can greatly affect the ability to suspend our disbelief and lose ourselves in the story. But if a story is compelling and the performances are great, no one will care about the actor's race. So despite my obvious need for Amazon's enormous production dollars to produce my own fantasy epic, I dare offer this advice to them. It is a disservice to the movement of racial tolerance and equality to accuse people of being racially bigoted because they don't like your show. If you want it to be accepted and loved, all you have to do is make it good. That said, if you require some help with the writing, which it seems to me you clearly do, I am available. As is the entire Giant Killers saga, I've already table read it for you. I hope we can all agree that racial tolerance and non-exclusion are always the best road to take for any successful business. If you want to make something the best it can be, choose the best people for the job. Judge them by the content of their character, or the content of their content, but not by the color of their skin, or any other factor they couldn't choose. It's easy for me to see the clear distinction here. Until next time, this has been Commentary with Conway Fitzgerald. Please remember to like if you do, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a thoughtful comment below.